So how do you decide which items to do first? Well, let's go over to the codification. Let's get down to earnings per share. And we're going to go down to paragraph 45, which is other presentation matters. And what we're looking for is some discussion about instruments or these contracts that we have that would actually make earnings per share go higher, right? We call them anti-dilutive. So down here a little bit, we've got this idea of no anti-dilution, right? And in paragraphs 45-18, this is really what we're focusing on, right? The goal is to be thinking about what is the maximum potential dilution. So the way they want you to do this is think about what's the sequence from the most dilutive to the least dilutive. Anything that's not anti-dilutive is not going to be included at all. And so we look at each one of these calculations. We look at if the options all got the assumption options were all exercised at the beginning of the period, and I'm using the treasury stock method. If I look at that and I take a look at, okay, this may be the most dilutive item because there's nothing going to happen in the numerator there, right? It's all going to be in the denominator, right? So there's no adjustment for the numerator there. So that's just adding to the denominator. Those may be the most dilutive because there's no effect on the numerator. Then when I move into other types of securities, not options, not warrants, the conversion items, because there is a numerator effect and a denominator effect, I want to actually take a look and do that little calculation. Get rid of the net income and put in the additional securities in the denominator. How much is that going to lower my earnings per share? Because really what I'm doing is I've got a plus to net income, right? If I'm getting rid of dividends, right? Because the dividends were subtracted out, now I'm adding that back to net income. Interest expense net of the tax gets added back to net income. Well, I have to look at that net income change divided by the number of shares I would have issued if converted. And if that number that I calculate is now higher than my basic earnings per share, that would suggest when I factor that into the calculation, it would be anti-dilutive. I'll try and come up with a little example here. See if we can do this. So if I calculate my basic earnings per share, and it worked out, we'll keep this simple. And it worked out to be $1 per share. Okay. Now, I have a conversion. Right? I have a conversion. And that conversion, let's say we're converting debt. The amount of interest income that was charged during the year was $200,000. Not interest income, interest expense. Okay, that's the amount of interest expense. For argument's sake, we'll use a effective tax rate of 20%. right? Use statutory effective. I mean, it makes sense that you'd probably use the statutory rate on the 200,000, but it's 21%, and I don't want to. Yeah, I can do the math pretty quickly, but we'll just use a straight 20%. So the tax rate, I'm just being somewhat lazy, is 20%. Okay, it's not the statutory rate is 21%, so we'll just say 20%, right? So the net effect on this interest expense is going to be this 20% lower. So the net effect of this, net of tax, we're looking at $160,000 net. Right? So I'm doing my little calculation. In the numerator, it's going to be $160,000 of interest expense. This conversion, this convertible debt, at the best rates possible, right? So this is it's a plus to net income. Because net income is now going to be higher because the assumption is I don't pay this interest expense net of the tax. The conversion of this particular debt got the individuals 15,000 shares. So we are assuming that it was converted at the beginning of the period, so therefore the 15,000 shares would have been outstanding throughout the entire year. So this increased shares outstanding by $15,000. Okay? So if I just do the calculation here of 15,000, I'm going to have to pull out my calculator. Here we go. Let's get the calculator out. What the heck? If we can find it, it's here. We're going to take the calculator, right? And we're going to actually do this, right? 160,000 divided by 15,000 shares. Or I should say 150,000 shares, sorry. I don't want to do 15,000 shares. Well, no, let's just say 15,000 shares. That's fine. Right? That's $10.66 a share. That net income just went up. Okay? If I factor this into my earnings per share calculation at $10.66, my earnings per share, if I factor this in to come up with diluted earnings per share, and I put this into the calculation, my diluted earnings per share will increase because of this particular conversion. Because of this particular conversion. So this would not factor into our calculation of diluted earnings per share. We would completely ignore this conversion. We wouldn't convert this debt because it's increasing our basic earnings per share. And so we do this for every single item, right? Any option, all we're doing there is we're going to be adding shares outstanding. There is no net income effect. Any warrants, only shares outstanding. Those are going to be dilutive because the denominator increases and there's no change in the numerator. But anything that is anti-dilutive, ignore it. So we take a look and we will do these as-if conversions, these if conversions, whether they're options, warrants, or convertible debt, convertible preferred, anything. And we're going to order them. the most dilutive individually to the least dilutive, and we're not even going to put in any of the anti-dilutive items.